This video is sponsored by MCRU, manufacturers of the mains distribution block and power cords used by a British audiophile. For more information, click the link in the description and use discount code BA10 for 10% off your order. Last year, there was a disturbance in the force. Well, as far as the sub £1,000 streamers are concerned, it seemed that Eversolo came out of nowhere and captured the hearts and minds of many hi-fi enthusiasts. Judging by how quickly it went out of stock, it captured their wallets as well. I'm not surprised. For £759, the DMP-A6 offers comprehensive connectivity, a CNC machine aluminium chassis and a 6-inch 150mm touchscreen colour LCD display. All that may have seemed previously unimaginable at this price. It's also a very good sounding device, good enough to pip the Bluesound Node X for my source component of the year in 2023 in the sub £1,000 category, but those of you who watched my original review where I pitched those two streamers head to head will have noted that neither of them won my top outstanding award, and that's because both have quite a bit of sonic coloration. The DMP-A6 can sound lean and even bright in certain systems, whereas the Bluesound Node X has a distinctly warm character. That means that some care needs to be taken with partner equipment. It also means that there's some room for improvement. I wonder if Cambridge Audio looked upon the success of the Eversolo DMP-A6 and felt the need to respond, the result being the new CXN100 streamer that replaces the outgoing CXN-V2 model. A point to note, I structure my streamer reviews these days a little bit differently than I do speakers, amplifiers and other source components, and that's because there's a little bit more to consider with regards to the user interface and connectivity. Naturally, I'm still fundamentally interested in how the unit is designed and how it sounds, and I'm sure you can tell from looking over my shoulder that the Eversolo DMP-A6 and the Bluesound Node X are still here, so I was able to do extensive A/B listening tests between all these streamers. So, is the new Cambridge Audio CXN100 the streamer to beat in the sub £1,000 category? Conventional is the best way to describe the styling of the CXN100. It's a full rack width unit that unassumingly blends in with other Cambridge Audio components from the CX and AX range. According to Cambridge Audio, the CXN100 is a ground-up redesign rather than a revision of the old CXN-V2, featuring the Gen 4 Stream Magic module and ditching the old Wolfson DAC chip for an ESS Sabre 9028Q2M. For the £899 outlay, the CXN100 lives up to expectations rather than exceeds them. The front fascia is metal and the chassis is from the standard thin folded steel you get on many accessibly priced products. In contrast, the £759 Eversolo DMP-A6 has much thicker plates of aluminium that constitute the casework. It still defines the standard for build quality in this class. Inside, the DMP-A6 uses two ESS Sabre 9038Q2M chips for independent digital to analog conversion of the left and right channels. The casework of the £699 Bluesound Node X is all plastic, but it's a much smaller device and has the kind of understated styling that will sit elegantly on a sideboard or desk. The Bluesound Node X also uses the same DAC chip as the Cambridge Audio CXN100, a single ESS Sabre 9028Q2M. I think personal taste and use case scenario are going to determine which of these streamers you're going to find the most appealing to look at. For example, it's going to be different at the end of a desk or in a hi-fi rack, but as far as overall design and build quality is concerned, I have to give that to the Eversolo. The CXN100 will stream internet radio. It supports Deezer, Qobuz, Tidal and Spotify, but apps like Apple Music, Amazon and BBC Sounds can only currently be accessed via AirPlay or Chromecast. The Stream Magic app can also be bypassed to use with Bluetooth, Spotify Connect, Tidal Connect and Roon. As for hardware connections, flanking the Ethernet RJ45 network port are two USB inputs, one to use with drives containing music and the other is a PC input. There are optical and coaxial digital inputs if you want to use the CXN100 as a DAC or you can use the optical and coaxial digital outputs to connect to an external DAC. The analog outputs are on the right. You have single-ended RCA and balanced XLR. The only benefit of balanced XLR analog outputs on a device like this is if you're running long cable runs, for example if it's sat on a sideboard well away from the rest of your hi-fi equipment. I see a full rack width unit like this more likely to find its home in a hi-fi equipment rack, and for that reason I'd have preferred that the money that went into producing analog balanced XLR outputs had gone into something like HDMI eARC. And that's because I see a lot of people using this as a digital hub, and having HDMI eARC means that you can use your TV remote to switch on and switch off this device as well as adjust the volume. It's a really convenient feature, especially when no remote control is offered as standard with the CXN100. It's an optional accessory for £25. The thing is that this device has two digital USB inputs, one to connect to a PC, but presently no asynchronous USB output. And that means you have to rely on the coaxial and optical digital inputs if you're connecting it to an external DAC. Those inputs are sometimes referred to as SPDIF. And the issue is it's the streamer's clock rather than the DAC's clock that's responsible for the exchange of information. The likelihood is if you're considering an external DAC as a performance upgrade, it's likely to have a better clock than the one inside this streamer. I suppose one way of considering it is that with SPDIF inputs, the DAC is reacting to things that are thrown at it as opposed to requesting information and having it received. The CXN100 also has no headphone input, just like the Eversolo DMP-A6, but I feel it's less of an issue on a full rack width unit that is less likely to be used as a desktop solution. The DMP-A6 has a host of digital connections, including both a USB input and output, but bizarrely they opted for a HDMI multi-channel output rather than HDMI eARC input, something that I'm sure Eversolo are regretting now. For such a compact device, I have to commend Bluesound for making the smartest choices when it comes to connectivity on the Node X. Not only is there a headphone socket on the front, but there's HDMI eARC on the rear, and the USB port can be used as an input for external drives or as an output for DACs. The 3.5mm optical port even doubles up as an analog input. So at superficial glance it may seem that the Eversolo DMP-A6 has the best connectivity, but the most useful connections are on the Bluesound Node X. The CXN100 has a nice colour LCD display, which is a bit smaller than the one on the Eversolo DMP-A6. There are 3 buttons on either side that allow access to basic functionality. On the left, to play, pause, skip forward and backwards through tracks. On the right, to cycle through display screens and toggle between inputs. It's a shame that for other functions, including accessing the streamer, you're forced to rely upon the StreamMagic app. Although it is fast, reliable and intuitively laid out, I had no problems with dropouts or the system crashing, but the graphical interface is pretty basic, similar to what I experienced with the Denon Marantz HEOS system. The Bluesound Node X is even more basic when it comes to directly interacting with the device. No screen to display art, just proximity controls that allow up to 5 presets to be stored, volume adjustment, play, pause and track shuffling in both directions. But the BlueOS system is a lot more advanced than Cambridge Audio StreamMagic. It has a more sophisticated graphical interface where you can customize screens. It's still the only UI out of these 3 streamers that allows you to create playlists across platforms, and that's something that I look for. As for the Eversolo DMP-A6, well, it just seems to keep getting better with firmware updates. The touchscreen display is a joy to interact with, putting much more expensive streamers to shame. A parametric EQ has been added since my review in November 2023. Once again, I had trouble getting the DMP-A6 to connect to my iPad and had to rely on my Samsung phone, so Eversolo still have some compatibility foibles to iron out, but the app worked like a dream on my phone, the graphics and layout being all you would wish for from an Android-based system. You have to hand it to Cambridge Audio. They really do know how to make nice sounding devices. In the context of price appropriate systems, it's a very well balanced sounding unit. I'm talking about speakers and amplifiers that individually retail for less than £1,000. Tonally, it sits just a little bit on the warm side, but not as far as the Bluesound Node X, which has a more relaxed presentation. It's certainly closer to that than it is the cooler sounding Eversolo DMP-A6. I hooked it up to one of my favourite combinations of accessibly priced speakers and amplifiers, the £599 Q-Acoustic 5020s and the £449 Iota VX SA3. I did try substituting the SA3 for the Cambridge Audio AXA35, but the rich sounding AXA35 doesn't pair well with the slightly warm sounding 5020s, so I switched back to the Iota amplifier to restore balance. Switching to the Eversolo DMP-A6, I could hear better resolution. It was most noticeable in terms of bass control and precision in imaging, but that leanness that the Eversolo also has to its sonic presentation was present, so I exchanged for the Bluesound Node X, which gave out the widest soundstage and the boldest bass, but the mid-range was also a little bit too relaxed. I guess if I was choosing a streamer in the context of this Q-Acoustic Iota system for long-term listening satisfaction, it would be the Cambridge Audio CXN100. Things were a little different as I increased the price point to the £1,400 Amphion Argon 1s, coupled to my £1,850 Exposure 2510. By the way, the price of both of those components has gone up recently. The Cambridge Audio CXN100 sounded inoffensive, but it was also clear that it was struggling for overall fidelity in this company. I appreciated the extra scale and authority that the Bluesound Node X delivered, but it sounded way too soft and coloured. As for the Eversolo DMP-A6, it offered good resolution. The sound was pretty much between the speakers, but that coolness that it has to the sound was now edging towards being bright and harsh, and that's my point. I couldn't live with any of these three streamers in the context of that Exposure Amphion system, and that's why as your system improves, not only do they need to function as streamers, but also streaming transports. So it was time to insert my favourite DAC for circa £1,000 and see if the Denafrips Aries 12-1 could save the day. The Eversolo sounded terrible through its optical and coaxial digital outputs, but USB was a different story. There was much better body to the mid-range and it sounded more open and refined. As for the Bluesound, well, the resolution improved again considerably when connected to the Denafrips DAC through its USB output, but it was still just a little bit too soft for my liking. Well, how about the Cambridge Audio CXN100, which, as I pointed out earlier, doesn't have an asynchronous USB output, so I had to rely on the coaxial and optical connections and let the streamer's clock take charge. This was the biggest surprise of the test. I don't want to get too technical, but performance here is all about jitter and noise, and despite the fact that the CXN100 doesn't have an asynchronous USB output, fidelity improved considerably. Not quite the resolution of the Eversolo DMP-A6, but better refinement and certainly better as a streaming transport than the Bluesound Node X. I have to hand it to Cambridge Audio. They clearly have done an excellent job of implementing their SPDIF digital outputs. I wasn't expecting that, but I still wish they'd included a USB digital output. One final thing before I move on, using the CXN100 as a digital preamp didn't impact on performance, so I wouldn't have any hesitation hooking up this device directly to a power amplifier or powered speakers. The Cambridge Audio CXN100 streamer is a viable alternative to the Eversolo DMP-A6 and the Bluesound Node X. It offers a more balanced sound than either of those two, whether used as a streamer or streaming transport. It doesn't sound as resolving as the Eversolo or have the scale of the Bluesound, nor will the user interface live up to the experience of either of those two brands, even though the streaming app is fast, stable and gets the job done. I guess I'd choose this streamer over the other two if I was pretty happy with the sound that was coming out of my speakers and amplifier, and I didn't want to shift the tonal balance too much in one direction or another. I think price is a little bit of an issue at £899. I don't think it justifies the extra outlay over the Node X or the DMP-A6, but you might be able to find it on sale to get better parity. All said, this is a solid product. The Cambridge Audio CXN100 gets a recommended from this channel. My question for today is, what features do you look for in a streamer? Please let me know in the comment section. It'd be a nice discussion to have. All that remains for me to say is if you like what I'm doing with this channel, you want to see it grow, and assuming you haven't done so already, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of consultancy tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also check out the ABA Club on Patreon, which has some great ways to interact with me and fellow Patreons. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.